Debbie and I are talking about the horrific school shooting in Texas, and you were making the point that, at one time, these mentally ill people were incarcerated. I mean, they were confined, and they were in institutions. And then the left said, you can't keep them confined. You're violating their civil rights. You're denying them their freedom.
Correct.
And so courts began to let these crazies loose. No surprise, some of them were unable to take care of themselves. A fair amount of our homeless population are people who either have such serious addictions or are just downright, bonkers. And then sometimes someone who's like that gets a hold of a weapon and then kind of goes crazy.
Right. Well, I mean, in some families, they do know that this person is that way, and they cannot do anything about it. They cannot call the police and say, I think that they're going to do something horrific, because they can't do anything about it. So I think that is where it needs to start. We need to start making an assessment about what we want to do with the mentally ill in this country. And if we are saying, because we always talk about how the water commissioner poisons the water well, and then comes back and says, "Oh, the water's poison," and he himself did it. So this is where I'm going with this: is that these liberal politicians make these kind of decisions, and not just with the mentally ill, but the criminals as well, as you know, right? There's a lot of criminals that get out of jail only to commit crimes again because they weren't really rehabilitated, right? And some of them are not able to be rehabilitated. But the liberal politicians don't care, right? They want to go ahead and let them out. They think that, we don't need to be violating their civil rights, all this and that. And then something like this happens. And then what do? They don't blame their liberal policies. They blame us for wanting to have guns. And this is where...
So you're saying that they unleash these psychos on the street. These psychos then get a hold of guns, and it's obviously not the gun at fault here. It's the psychotic acting out.
You remember that man that went crazy at the parade with his truck,
the Waukesha guy.
The Waukesha guy. He went crazy. He killed a bunch of people with his truck. You did not hear them calling for truck control, right? Or SUV control. Oh, we have to sell less SUVs because they're lethal weapons. No, of course not.
Because everybody understood that it's the guy driving. Of course not.
Everyone understood that the guy was the lunatic and not the car, right? And so, but in this case, the gun is the crazy thing and not the lunatic. So we just have to make sure that people understand that this is the excuse that politicians use to take away guns. And let me tell you why I know this. I always come back to Venezuela, but this is indeed what happened in Venezuela. There was a propaganda machine that was calling for people to voluntarily give up their weapons. It was called Desarma la violencia, right? Disarm the violence. And basically what they would do, they would have these candlelight vigils because there was a lot of violence in Venezuela with guns and whatnot. So they would have these commercials where they would show a young man going to a party, and before he walked out of the door, he would go and get his gun, and then he would put it in his jacket, and then he would zip up his jacket. So immediately it would take to a morgue where they were zipping up the body bag. Okay, so jacket to body bag. And so this was the type of propaganda that they were doing in Venezuela, so that they made sure that people thought that owning a gun was a bad thing. But here's the problem with that, is the people that still in Venezuela own guns, the government and the criminals. And so Venezuela is one of the most violent countries in the world. Caracas is one of the most violent cities in the world. Why? Because we have all these criminals with guns, and the citizens, the law-abiding citizens, are walking around helpless, not able to defend themselves from criminals or from the government, etc. So this is what happens. And let me give you another example of these types of policies in just America right now. So, all of these mass shootings happen at schools, they happen at grocery stores, they happen in movie theaters, places like that, public places, malls. All of these places have a sign on their door that says no weapons allowed, right? So what does a law-abiding citizen do? They leave their weapon in the car. Because why? Because they're law-abiding. They know that they can't go in with a weapon, so they leave it in the car. Do you really think these lunatics read those signs and come in and go,
Oh, you know what? I'm a lunatic. I really can't bring my gun in here.
My gun. Oops.
In fact,
Sorry about
they
that.
think the opposite. They probably
Exactly
think, I'm sure, they're confident no one is armed.
Right. So these places, schools, malls, theaters, all these places they leave people as sitting ducks because they cannot defend themselves. If I was a person in there and I had my weapon on me, do you really think that I would just sit there and let this gunman do their thing? Of course not.
Of course not. Be right back.